Good morning. We have dealt with child psychology, the first two psychology theories from the psychodynamic theories. Today, we will be dealing with the third segment, which is a third theory. It is a cognitive theory that was given by Jean Piaget, and we will be following it up with the behavioral theories. So, this cognitive theory, this was given by Jean Piaget in the year 1952. This theory deals with the child's view of the world, how the child sees the world in many aspects. So this theory involves the following few key concepts which are very important for you to know. One, it is known as the operation, the other schemas, then you have assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration. What basically is operation? Operation is any act or any physical act that the child can do mentally, and it can be reversible. That is, the child can think about a perfect to perform an act mentally, and the child can make that act which can be reversible. Schema is a word that is used when the child's mental and physical actions are involved in knowing and understanding the world. For example, if you ask a small child how to put a giraffe into the refrigerator, the child would probably think and answer, you need to open the fridge, take the giraffe, put the giraffe inside the fridge, then close the fridge. So that is nothing but knowing and understanding the world around. So going to another important terminology, which is assimilation. Assimilation is an individual's adjustment to a new information. What exactly is information in this? For example, a aeroplane is in the sky. To the child, an aeroplane is also a bird. So when a small child is going to look at the aeroplane, all flying things are classified as bird. That is what the child would have learned. Or all birds fly. That is what the child would have learned. So when the child is looking up at the sky and the child finds there is an aeroplane, the child will associate that with a bird. So that is an information the child is having, but we are telling the child that it is not a bird, that is an aeroplane. So the child is getting used to the new information. So this adjustment to the new information is called as assimilation. So accommodation is when the child starts thinking of that, and that new information the child is able to add into the existing knowledge. So after some time, when there is a bird which is flying, the child is able to say, this is a bird which flies, this is an aeroplane, this is not a bird, this is a vehicle for commuting. When the child is able to think of that and use that knowledge, that is known as accommodation. So equilibration is the child's basic assumptions are changed because of the adjustments, and the child is able to move on from one stage to the next stage. That is known as equilibration. So these are the four important key concepts that the child should learn. So repeating them again. Schemas are the mental and the physical actions which is involved in knowing and understanding the child's world. Assimilation is a child's adjustment to a new information. Accommodation is to the new information. The child is able to still modify that information. That is accommodation. Equilibration is using the assimilated and the accommodated knowledge. The child is able to make it into an action or perform an operation or perform a schema. That is known as equilibration. So there are four stages of cognitive growth. The first stage is the sensory motor stage, which is between 0 to 2 years of age, the pre-operational between 2 to 6 years of age, the concrete operational between 6 to 12 years of age, and the formal operational between 11 and 15 years of age. So going on to the first stage, which is sensory motor stage, which is between 0 to 2 years. So this is a stage where the child is completely dependent only on the reflex activities. It is more of initial stages. It is the sensory which will be developed, and later on, as a child is nearing 2 years of age, the motor reflexes start improving. So the child starts accommodating to the world. The child starts communicating with the world by using small physical motoric actions. So, and the child senses everything only by the sensory experiences, such as the child can see, the child can hear, but the child cannot really speak so much. And the child point out things. For example, the child wants the fan to be switched on. The child will look up at the sky and point towards the child will look up at the ceiling and point towards the ceiling. That is called as a motoric action. The child wants the bottle to be held by himself or herself. When the child is taking the feed, the child will take both the hands and hold on to the bottle. That is again a motoric action. So this stage, it begins the thinking process for the child, because the child is able to think small things. For example, the child wants to go outside and go with the father and the bike. That child will point towards the bike, because the child starts using one finger. That is a primitive symbol that the child uses. The child is able to think the fact that a bike is used to going out. The child cannot explain, but the child knows that. So it begins the thinking process. And in this stage, the first stage, there's something which is known as object permanence, which develops. Object permanence is, to the child, everything is permanent in life, be it the animate or the inanimate. Everything is permanent in life because the child keeps having repeated contacts with the environment. So everything, for example, the sky is going to remain the way it is. So that is known as object permanence. Nothing ever changes from the child's point of view in sensory motor stage. So moving on to the next stage, which is known as the pre-operational stage. This is between 2 and 6 years of age. In this pre-operational stage, the child will experience, and the child is able to accommodate the original strategies, and the child starts using small words in language and in play. So whatever the child has assimilated the knowledge, the child is able to accommodate or use that information and modify that information in order to do things. That is, a child is able to classify things. A 1-year-old child may not be able to say that this is exactly an apple. A 1-year-old child can point out to the fact this is an apple. But by the time the child is 2 years, 2.5 years, the child can say this is an apple, because the child is learning to classify things. The child is able to tell this is red color, this is blue color, this is big, this is small, 1, 2. The child can represent the world with words and images. So there are two stages in this pre-operational stage. The first stage, which is known as the symbolic activity, which comes under the pre-conceptual stage. This stage itself, we divide them into 2 to 4 years and 4 to 7 years or 4 to 6 years. So pre-conceptual stage, it has symbolic activity, and the stimulus makes things more meaningful to the child. Symbolic activity is the child still points out. The child uses small things as a stimulus. Whereas in the next stage, which is an intuitive stage, which is between 4 to 6 years of age, the child tries to solve things, and the child can solve it, but the child is not able to tell the reason why the child has solved a particular puzzle or why the puzzles fit into proper places. Here, the thought process is still dominated by immediate sensory impressions. You have a puzzle, the big one gets into the small one, and then the smaller one, and then a bigger one. So it is all by immediate sensory impressions. So you can see in this picture, there is one boy where there is two small glasses which is placed in front of the boy. You can see both the glasses are half full. And then you can see a person pouring a liquid into a taller glass or a taller beak. So the child is, the same amount of water is poured into the taller beak glass and the one which is a short broad glass. But when you're asking the child who's in the pre-operational stage, which one is better, the child will be able to point out to the one which he thinks is bigger to the child, because this is to do in the intuitive stage where the child goes only by sensory imagination, sensory impressions immediately. The child will tell the taller, thinner beak contains more water than the short, broad glass. The child is not able to think that same 100 ml of water is going into both the glasses. The child will only see it by sensory impressions, immediate sensory impressions. And another thing which develops in this period is animism, which is present in the first part of the stage, that is in the preconceptual stage. Animism is a very important terminology of pre-operational stage because every inanimate object, the child considers it to be animism. The child gives soul to every inanimate object. For example, when the child goes and bangs himself on the floor or hits himself on the door and it hurts him, what the child thinks that the door or the floor is a living soul and the child would like to hit it, or the child will ask the parent to come and hit it because that is the child feels that is a animate object. The child does not know that it's an inanimate object. So another important thing which exists in the pre-operational stage is known as egocentrism. Egocentrism is the child is able to view the world only from his point of view. For example, there are three toys kept. If the child feels all the three toys are the same, the child will be able to view only from that concept. The same way, if the child cannot see from somebody else's point of view, the child can only understand the world only from his point of view. So the dental application in this stage is because the children are learning to explore, they want to make their own observations. The child will be interested to get to know what is the micromotor that we are using, or what is the aerator that we are using, why is the water coming from the aerator, or why is the suction making noise. So these are things which the child would like to know and ask questions. And at the same time, if you are explained about what it is and you're allowed to deal with it, you're allowing the child's thinking process which is maturing to make choices. And at the same time, since the child is just out of the animism, the child is still giving a living soul to an inanimate object. See, instead of calling the aerator handpiece, for example, you're calling the aerator handpiece as a whistling Winnie, that you're giving a name to the aerator. So the child gets excited by that, and probably because of that, the child can cooperate more in the dental office. So these are the few things by which we can make the child cooperate in the dental office in this particular stage. At the same time, in the stage between 2 to 6, it's always better to have the parental presence in the operatory. So moving on to the next stage, which is the concrete operational stage, which is between 6 to 12 years of age. In this stage, the thinking process is becoming much more logical. The child is able to tell why and what. So this stage, there is a enormous surge, or there is a lot of improvement in the way the child starts presenting himself intellectually, the way the child starts understanding the world, the child starts understanding knowledge becomes much more in this stage. So there are different types of this intellectual presentation. One, when the child is able to classify according to size. For example, you have size number 1, 2, 3, 4. The child will be able to arrange it either in ascending order or in descending order according to the size. Or you tell a number, the child will be able to tell the number. This is known as seriation. That is the ability to sort out objects in an order which is according to the size, or it can be according to the shape. You want the rectangle, the triangle, and then the circle. The child will be able to sort objects in this particular order. The next one is the child can do logical inferences. For example, you're telling the child that Ram is taller than Krishna, who is taller than Hare Rama, for example. So the child will be able to tell of the three who is taller. If Ram is taller than Krishna, then the child will say Ram is taller than Krishna, but Krishna is taller than Hare Rama means automatically the child will be able to inform that. So the next one is classification. The child is able to identify sets of objects. You call them as apples, you call them as oranges. The child is able to identify different sets of objects. Or you call books, you call notepads, you call cotton rolls, you call cotton pads. The child is able to identify sets of objects. At the same time, decentering is a process where the child can take multiple aspects of a problem and solve it. As in, you can give 2, 3 problems at the same time. The child will be able to solve it with. In the previous stage, the child will be looking at it only from his point of view. But here, since there is going to be elimination of egocentrism, the child can look at multiple aspects of a problem in order to solve it. That is why in school, they start the mathematical solutions or the statement problems in this particular phase. The other one going to is reversibility. For example, In the previous stage, the child will not be able to say 2 plus 2 is 4 or 4 minus 2 is equal to 2 in the initial stages. But in this reversibility, the child will be able to say 4 plus 4 is equal to 8 and 8 minus 4 also gives 4 only. Or you are giving the child, for example, 4 plus 4 is equal to t. So t minus 4 is equal to what? So the child is able to return to the original state. So the numbers or the objects, they can be changed yet again, they can return to the original state. And in this stage, as mentioned earlier, the child is able to view from another person's point of view. So the dental application will be concrete instructions can be given to the child. You can allow the child to hold the suction tip and assist. So that way you're making the child cooperate with you in the dental office. You're involving the child in what you are doing. Since the child is intellectually better to understand, able to understand what will happen. This is the concrete operational stage. So moving on to the next stage, which is the formal operational stage. This is between 11 and 15 years of age, where the individuals will move beyond concrete experiences. So now whatever the child thinks in this age group, it is based on his own previous experiences. The child at this stage can think more logically and they can predict out of their ability whether they can do the work or they cannot do the work, what is possible and what is not possible, and they can give solutions to a problem. And in this stage, the adolescents, they start developing images of ideal circumstances. They start thinking there is a imaginary audience and everybody is thinking from their point of view. It's not that in the previous egocentrism, the child can see only from his point of view. But here the child thinks everybody is thinking what he wants to think. That is known as a personal, and he always thinks people are looking at him or looking at her and they are talking about him, they're talking about her. So they have an imaginary audience and there is a personal fable which is associated with this. And since the peer group pressure is going to be more in this phase, in the dental application, aesthetic and corrective dental treatment can easily be done. So moving on to the next theory, which is known as the classical conditioning theory, which was given by Ivan Pavlov in 1927. Basically, this theory comes under behavioral learning theories, and the theories which are following are also under the behavioral learning theories. So this operates by association of one stimulus with each other. For example, when there is no association between two different objects, there is no pairing at all. Nothing is going to happen. That's why now we are going to see this very famous example, which is a dog experiment of Pavlov. You can see in the first picture, there is something called before conditioning. Food is an unconditioned stimulus. The dog, whenever it sees food or whenever it sees meat, the dog's response will be to salivate. That is what we call as an unconditioned stimulus, which is the meat, and the dog is responding by salivating. Now, we are going to do something called a conditioning process. We want to start a conditioning process. We are ringing a bell. When we ring a bell, does the dog salivate? No, there is no salivation because the bell is a neutral stimuli. The dog is not associated with it. So the dog does not salivate. So there is no conditioned response here. Whereas during conditioning, we want to make this neutral stimuli a unconditioned, we want to make the neutral stimuli a conditioned stimuli. So what we do is whenever we ring the bell, we are also serving the dog with meat. So what happens along with the bell, which is a neutral stimuli, the unconditioned stimuli is also placed. So the dog's response is also there. So the dog starts salivating. After conditioning, what happens? You're not serving the dog any meat, you're just ringing the bell. The neutral stimuli has changed into a conditioned stimuli and that has become a conditioned response. So going again into the same thing, the learning that results from an association or pairing of two stimuli, that is classical conditioning theory. Based on this, you have before conditioning, during conditioning and after conditioning. Before conditioning, an unconditioned stimulus. An unconditioned stimulus will evoke an unconditioned response. A neutral stimuli, there is no conditioning, so there will not be any response. But during the conditioning process, the previous neutral stimuli gets the capacity or it gets the capacity to evoke a conditioned response. And after conditioning, the conditioned stimuli evokes a conditioned response. So the principles of classical conditioning, it's acquisition, it is learning or forming a new response from the environment due to conditioning. What the child is learning from the environment. So there are three principles mainly what we call in this. One is known as generalization, discrimination and extinction. Generalization is, it is a process of conditioning where everything is centered around a conditioned stimuli which will evoke a conditioned response. In generalization, everything is centered around, there is a conditioned stimuli which will evoke a conditioned response. In discrimination, the child responds only to a particular stimuli. In extinction, the removal of the conditioned behavior is there, and the association between the conditioned and the unconditioned response, it is not reinforced, then it leads to extinction. So going to each of this in detail. See, in the first visit, the doctor's white coat, which is a neutral stimuli, that gives a unconditioned stimuli, which is a pain of injection. So in this particular stage, what we can tell is that whenever a child sees a doctor in white coat, a doctor in white coat will always cause pain. So the child is basically crying. So there is going to be an unconditioned stimuli, but it is causing an unconditioned stimulus, which is pain of injection. The child starts crying. Then you have the pain of injection, and because of the pain of injection, the response of the child is fear and crying. So the neutral stimulus will evoke no response, but because of the neutral stimulus, the unconditioned stimulus of pain and injection will give a response which is fear and crying. In the second visit, when the child is coming, the child is used to the white coat. When the child sees the white coat, and then the child starts crying, which is a response. But since the unconditioned stimuli of the injection is not present, the child will stop crying. Going to the next theory, which is the operant conditioning theory. This is an extension of the classical conditioning theory, where the consequence of a behavior is a stimulus that will affect the future behavior response of the child. So, how the environment modifies the child's behavior. So, the operant is nothing but the behavior which is learned from operating on their environment. How the child is able to operate based on the situation that he or she is in. So the relationship that the child forms between that operant and the consequences that are occurring, that is known as contingency. The relationship that exists between operant and the consequences is known as contingency. So this particular theory can also be called as exploratory or goal-seeking actions with their consequences, or it is known as, it can be instrumental conditioning. So the learning that occurs when a result of a behavior modifies the nature of behavior so that good behavior will be repeated in future. So a reinforcement, a positive reinforcement can be given. So this is an important aspect of operant conditioning theory, which is basically depending on the factor of giving a stimuli in order to evoke a particular response. And any response that we require is only a positive response, which is cooperative behavior. So there are four types of operant conditioning. One is known as the positive reinforcement. What is positive reinforcement? Is presentation. You're presenting a present stimuli so that the good behavior will be increased. For example, the child has cooperated well. At the end of treatment, you're giving the child a small gift. You're giving the child a small reward. So that will make sure that probably that will increase. When the next visit the patient comes, the child will start cooperating in the same good behavior pattern. For example, in negative reinforcement, you have a withdrawal of an unpleasant stimulus, which will increase the probability of desirable behavior. We should understand here, desirable behavior is always cooperative behavior. In negative reinforcement, for example, the child is not sitting in the dental chair. He wants to run away from the dental chair. You allow him to run away from the dental chair. You're not calling the child back to the dental chair and continuing with the treatment. This gives the child a thought process. Whenever he wants to run away, whenever he escapes from the dental chair, then he will be allowed to move away. So that should be stopped. So what we have to do is you have to withdraw the unpleasant stimuli. You have to make sure that you are doing something to make sure the child is sitting in the dental chair. You don't allow him to escape. That is negative reinforcement. So omission is also known as timeout. You're withdrawing a particular or a pleasant stimuli for a particular period of time so that the child's misbehavior will decrease. That is withdrawal of a pleasant stimuli in order to decrease the misbehavior. For example, the child is holding on to a favorite toy or the mother is standing by the child all the time. When the child is behaving badly, when the child is not opening the mouth properly, you either take the toy away or you tell the mother you leave the place for some time. So you're removing the pleasant stimuli for some time. Then once the bad behavior decreases, then what you do is you bring the mother back into the operatory or you give the toy back to the child. So this is known as timeout. You're withdrawing the pleasant stimuli for a particular period of time in order to decrease the misbehavior. The fourth one is the punishment, where you're presenting an unpleasant stimuli. For example, the child's behavior is not proper. So, in order to make that undesirable behavior into a desirable behavior, you are suddenly using a voice control therapy. You are being loud with a child. Sometimes, if you need to use a physical restraint, you are using a physical restraint. So, these are things where you are presenting the child with an unpleasant stimuli because the child does not like the stimuli. You're presenting an unpleasant stimuli so that the probability of the undesirable behavior will be down and the probability of the desired behavior increases. So, the types of operant conditioning are four: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, omission, and punishment. So moving to the next theory, which is known as the social learning theory. Social learning theory by Albert Bandura. It was given in the year 1963. So this is basically motivated by large social needs. Everything to do with this theory is to by from learning from the society around us. So this is an active information process that is prevalent in the society itself. And a lot of things are only through trial error search that happens in this theory. So there are four processes in this theory. One is known as the attention, second is the retention, third reproduction, and fourth is the motivation. Attention is, for example, your patient is crying and your friend's patient is not crying. You're asking your patient to have a look at your friend's patient. So when the child is giving attention to the child who is not crying, the child is watching that behavior. The child is giving attention to that behavior. And once the child does that behavior, then when the child comes back and then you're starting to do the treatment, the child is reproducing that good behavior. That means the child, after watching the displayed behavior of the next patient, is remembering that. The process where the child is remembering that displayed good behavior or the watched, observed good behavior is known as retention. And when the child is able to enact that learned behavior or reproduce that good behavior, that is known as reproduction. And once the child reproduces the good behavior, there should be a motivation so that again the learned or the good behavior will again surface. So the four processes are attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. So attention is given to a model behavior. Retention is encoding of that particular model behavior, and reproduction is performance of action at trial, and motivation is appreciation for the good behavior. So moving on to the next theory, which is the hierarchy of needs. This was given by Maslow in 1954. In this theory, it has been given in the form of a pyramid where there is the physiological of needs, which is the base of the theory, where it requires food, water, warmth, rest, shelter. These are the basic physiology of a person. And then comes security and safety. And then comes relationships with family, with friends, with the outside world. And then is the fourth phase, which is the esteem needs, where there is a lot of prestige and there is a feeling of accomplishment. And finally is self-actualization, where the person feels they have achieved the full potential, including all the creative activities. So the basic needs of a person are between the physiology of needs and the safety needs. And then the psychological needs of the person will be belongingness and love needs, which is the esteem needs. And then the self fulfillment needs will be the self actualization. So, for example, being in final year, what will be your physiological need apart from food, water, warmth, rest? You need to attend your theory classes. You need to have 80% of attendance. Only when you have 80% of attendance, then your need of you will have a safety and security that you will be allowed to appear for your university exam. You have finished the required quota, only then you will be able to attend. At the same time, psychologically, in the same time, you need a lot of belongingness to the unit that you are. You need to know what's happening in every department. You need to have good relationships for you to be psychologically happy. When all these three needs are met, what happens is, once your quota is complete and you know that you have more than 90% of attendance, you start having a certain sense of prestige and a feeling of accomplishment. Yes, I have done my part for the final year. So far well, your psychological needs are met. So this will give you a mild feeling of accomplishment, which gives you some amount of confidence. And once you start taking up the final year exam and then you go through you sail smoothly and your results are positive, you have a feeling that you have attained your potential. That is your self fulfillment. So this theory, hierarchy of needs, can be applied to many different situations, but this is not very practically applied when it comes to a child in terms of behavior management. So, but other theories can be considered, but this theory gives an importance why, how we have to approach the child in order to make the child feel self-actualization. Try to motivate the child based on the basic needs and then the child's psychological needs, and then move on to the self-fulfillment to achieve a complete full mouth rehabilitation. So with all this, these theories, we can understand the child's desire, the child's social environment, his interaction with the environment, how he can change his behavior, how he can learn his behavior, how the child can modify the behavior and thereby cooperate for a good behavior in the dental office, so that we will be able to perform a very effective and a meaningful dental treatment for the child. Thank you.